Good morning. You tuned into the International Connection for another Sunday. We're continuing on with our series on mind control, and this week we're going to be featuring a presentation done by Claudia Mullen at the recent Believe the Children conference in Chicago of April of '97, where she describes her growing up in an atmosphere of an abusive mother and her mother involving her in mind control experiments at Tulane University in New Orleans. Claudia Mullen also gave testimony about mind control to the Presidential Advisory Committee on Human Radiation Experiments in March of '95. You'll hear her refer to multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder, which is the new term for multiple personality. And we have heard in previous shows how severe trauma can cause dissociation or multiple personalities in some children, and how multiple personalities has been used by the CIA to create programmed agents for government intelligence and military. The second half of this hour, we'll be starting an interview I conducted with Claudia, and that will continue on for the next 2 weeks after. You're listening to 88.1 CKLN.
And thank you for coming this afternoon. And you'll pardon me if I'm a little bit nervous, but I see some friendly faces out there, so that makes it better. Let's see if I can figure out how to turn this on. Can you all read that? It says, it is 1953. How much is a child's mind worth? If you'll picture this with me, this little girl. She's not quite 3 years old. She's been adopted when she was 2.5 years old, lived in an orphanage until then, from the time she was born. They called it infant asylums back then. She was adopted by this prominent, wealthy family in New Orleans. And she's been preparing for this picture for about 3 weeks now. And the way she prepared is her monster mom, which she calls the mommy that adopted her. She calls her the monster mom. Monster mom has been letting her go outside every day and play in the sandbox completely naked, so that she gets, quote, brown as a berry all over. And her little toe head gets even blonder. So she's not really sure why this is so important, but she's going to get her picture taken. So the day has come. Monster Mom puts on her little sundress and her tennis shoes, puts on her charm bracelet that her godmother gave her, and she goes outside in the backyard, and there's a man out there with a camera. Strange man. So the little girl's like very, very nervous, because, just like me, because see, everything in her life has to be completely controlled. Everything has to happen according to how her mother wants it to be. Otherwise, there's serious repercussions. She gets hurt real bad. Plus, Monster Mom likes to do kind of yucky things to her that she doesn't really understand why, but it's all part of life. So, actually, by the time she was about 20 months old, when she lived in the orphan asylum, she had started to have imaginary friends that she talked to, and they comforted her. And so now she has a few more imaginary friends who sometimes come out when mommy does the yucky things, or when she gets punished for spilling her milk or not washing her hands all the way. Anyhow, so mommy says, now you be a good girl and don't make mommy mad, because you know what'll happen. Well, what'll happen is you'll go back to the orphan asylum. She's always being told that's what's going to happen if she's bad. Mommy can always hold that over her head, and she does until she's a teenager, when her mommy dies. But anyhow, so she gets ready for the picture, and already she's completely controlled. And she stands there and she gets ready to smile, because mommy says, smile for the man. And she tilts her head like she always does when she smiles. And all of a sudden, the little strap on the sundress falls down. Ooh, and she doesn't know what she's going to do, because this means Monster Mom's going to get really, really mad, because she didn't plan on this happening. But instead, something really strange happens. Mommy comes up, kind of looks at her, kneels down, and goes, "Perfect," and pulls the strap down a little bit more. Just like that, she says, "Okay, take a picture. Smile." And so she smiles. And turns out, the reason Mommy wanted to take the picture was to send it to all her society friends that she wants to be in with, because she's what you would call a social climber. And the little girl doesn't realize until years later what Mommy was really doing. She was advertising her daughter that she had adopted, this wonderful thing that she had done for this little girl. And she was basically, I guess you could say, auctioning her, or advertising her. And pretty soon after the picture went out, the little girl started having to spend the night at people's houses, people that were real rich and lived on St. Charles Avenue and belonged to all the best carnival crews, came to parties at their house, but they didn't have any children. But still, the little girl had to go stay over there, spend the night sometimes, and let the daddy over there do whatever he wanted. And she couldn't complain, because you had to do what grown-ups told you, because that's just the way life was. There wasn't any such thing as no, or I don't want to, or ooh, that's yucky, that makes me feel bad. So, this is what life is pretty much like. And Monster Mom finally gets what she really wants, and that's to be good friends with the most prominent, quote, social society man in the city of New Orleans, because he just happens to be captain of the most exclusive carnival crew, Rex. If anybody's been to Mardi Gras, you know what Rex is. So, Monster Mom has now become good friends with Mr. Fenner, who is this rich society man, and the little girl's starting to spend a lot of time with Mr. Fenner and some of his friends. And pretty soon she starts going to a camp that Mr. Fenner runs all year long across the lake, and it's in Covington, Louisiana, and it's at one of his summer homes. And there's other little girls and boys there, and they do strange things, and men come over, and they have parties at night, and they pass around the little girls and boys just like they were appetizers at a party. And except for the very first Christmas after she got adopted, and when she was 11 years old, she doesn't ever spend Christmas at home again, or her birthday. Both times, she's always over at the camp. And usually Easter, Halloween, and right before school starts in August. And nobody ever asks, why isn't she ever home for Christmas? Where is she? Even her big sister, who's 5 years older than her and is not adopted and doesn't have to go to camp, she never really dares to ask, why isn't my little sister home for Christmas? Why can't she get any Christmas presents? Because she has to be at the camp. But nobody asks, not even her daddy, her adopted daddy. Now she has lots of daddies and uncles. So now the little girl is really being controlled. Her mind, her body, everything they think they have control over. Because basically, the way her life is she does what the grown-ups tell her, and she's a good girl, and it doesn't hurt too much. It might hurt a little, or it might hurt a lot sometimes, but then it's over with. And that's the way life is, until she's in second grade. Oh, and she goes to this exclusive all-girls Catholic school, which she was very lucky to get into. But before that, she went to preschool at Tulane University, which just happens to be one of the most prestigious universities in the South. And where Mr. Fenner, remember Mommy's society friend, he's chairman of the board. And he's also very good friends with Dr. Robert Heath, who is the head of the neuropsychiatric department in Tulane, and who happens to be good friends with a lot of people that work for the government, that work for the president, and for something called the CIA. She has no idea what that means. And by the time she's in second grade, she's told she's being tested. Tested, her personality tested, her memory. She's told she has a very good memory. Well, they didn't even know how good her memory was, because actually one of her little imaginary friends had a camera in her head, and she took pictures and she recorded everything that everybody that she had to be with, everybody she had to that she had to be nice to, everybody that tested her. Okay. Anyhow, she's told that she's being tested to see if she can go away to this camp. And she goes, oh no, camp. But this sounds like a really nice camp, because it's all the way in the mountains, and it's far away from home, away from Monster Mom, away from Mr. Fenner's camp. And she might be going there if she passed her test. And some of the tests are, well, there's doctors that come from all over the country to test her, and they do some pretty horrible things to her, and they want to test her for pain, like I said, memory, personality, and also to see who she seems to get along with the best. And it turns out that she tests that she gets along with older men, daddies, quote, daddies or uncles. That's who she seems to respond to the best. So she's told, well, you've been accepted to this camp. So she goes away the next summer for 3 weeks in August to a place called Deep Creek Lodge in Maryland. And she takes a train with a bunch of strangers that she doesn't know, and there's other children on the train, but she happens to be the youngest one. And so she, they let her sleep in the, I think they called them club cars back then, where they stayed up all night drinking and talking about something called projects, and doctors and deputy directors and people like that. And she's supposed to be asleep, but she's really, the little girl inside of her with the camera in her head is taking down everything that she hears. So she gets to this camp. It really is the nicest 3 weeks of her entire life so far, because nobody really hurts her there. She doesn't get any shots except for antibiotics, she's told, so she doesn't get an infection. She doesn't get any electricity in her head. Nothing that bruises her. And the best part is that she got to pick a daddy to be with for the 3 weeks, and the daddy was going to teach her something very important. And this was for her country, and she was doing the President of the United States a favor and helping to stop communism. That's what this was all about. And so she feels very special, very important. And so she does her best. And she gets to pick this man. They match him together. There's other children there. There's girls even younger than her. Boys. Can't forget the boys. Teenagers, and then a few young women, but mostly children. And they all get paired up with an adult and spend the 3 weeks training. And what training means is that every day, Uncle Otto, that's what this man calls himself, he's a doctor, that's all she knows, and he's from Kansas, but other than that, she doesn't know anything about him, except that he's very nice to her. And she wants to go home with him. She even asks if she can go home with him afterwards. And they let her pick a name, because see, when she goes to Tulane to get all these tests and treatment, she was told that she behaved badly at home because she wet her bed, and she used to cry a lot, and sometimes she touched herself where she wasn't supposed to, and she did these, quote, abnormal things. So her mother had brought her to Tulane. That's how she got to Tulane, or that's how they got her into Tulane, was to say that she had childhood schizophrenia and aberrant behavior, whatever that means. So, anyhow, she, okay, so she's spent 3 weeks, and what's basically, they went swimming, no clothes, they didn't wear clothes hardly at all. She ate every meal with this man. She slept at night with him. And during the day, he taught her, basically, what he said was how to please daddies. And it was kind of yucky, and she didn't really like it, but at least it didn't hurt. It didn't make her bleed, so that made her happy. And the only bad part was at the end of the 3 weeks when she was told that she passed, that she did a very good job. Oh, and every evening they would watch these movies. And the little girl doesn't like to see herself in movies because she's always without any, doesn't have any clothes on, always has these daddies or uncles that are doing things to her in the movies. Sometimes it was, other times when she had movies taken, there were children, other children, boys, girls, animals, you name it, just about everything. But anyhow, every evening, Uncle Otto and little Ava, she named herself Ava after Ava Gardner because she loved movie stars. And they would watch these movies and see how well she did. And what she was supposed to do, besides pleasing the daddies, was she was told she had to do something called coercing, which she didn't know what that meant, but it meant make them talk about themselves. Make them tell you about their fancy homes that they live in, or how many children they have, or how much their wives spend too much money on shopping. And sure enough, these different daddies that come in from out of town, you know, when she wasn't with Uncle Otto, they would talk about themselves. And some of them even said, "You're about the same age as my little girl." And years later, when the little girl would start to remember, she would be very sad because she would think, well, those little girls at home, they were probably glad that Daddy was away. But anyhow, so she finishes the 3 weeks, and the last night they throw a party to celebrate that the, quote, project was a success. And it was called something called sensitive research, and it came under something called an MK Ultra, whatever that was. And the last night, a lot of people flew in from out of town on little bitty planes, very rich men, people that worked with the President of the United States, and people in uniforms, and they all got drunk, and once again, the little girl got passed around like she was an hors d'oeuvre. And it was a terrible night, and it lasted forever. And at the end of it, she should have been in the hospital, but she wasn't. She was on the train going back to New Orleans, and she was pretty well, should have been in intensive care, actually. And they sent her home, and she had to go to Tulane Hospital, and she stayed there while she recovered. And then it was over, and she never went back to that camp because she had learned what she was supposed to learn. And this was what she was supposed to do. This was going to be her job, to help her country, of course. No. So the funny thing was, though, this went on and on for years, and she, when she would go home from her, quote, treatments that she had to go to at Tulane, and sometimes treatments meant that she took trips to places where there were airplanes and military people in uniforms and had wings on their jackets, and huh? Oh yeah, that right. She was told that she had to go to for treatments. The strange thing was that when she would come home, she couldn't remember what happened at the hospital. She knew she went somewhere because she had this thing called schizophrenia, which you don't talk about because we don't want anybody to know that my child sees a psychiatrist, of course. That would be horrible. So it's another big secret that she has to keep. She has a lot of secrets she has to keep. She really doesn't like doing that, but it's part of life. Doesn't every little girl have to keep secrets? Doesn't every little girl have to please daddies and uncles? Doesn't every little girl have monsters in her life? She thought so. And she also thought everybody had imaginary friends inside of them that had different names and looked different, and even had different hair than her. Some were strong. some were littler than her. She thought everybody had these things. She thought this was the way life was because she never knew any different. And the strange thing was, though, that she never remembered. She could never really remember, and that's because they would put what they said was electricity in her head, and that hurt, and it always gave her bad headaches. And when she went home, she always got this liquid medicine that her mother would give her to make her sleepy. And so that's how they made her forget. And supposedly she was supposed to forget forever, but she was told that since doctors were they were like next to God, to her, she was always supposed to go back to the doctors and tell them if she started having headaches or nightmares. And sometimes she would have nightmares, horrible nightmares. And she would walk in her sleep, and then Monster Mom would call the doctors and say, she's doing something again, I can't control her, I'm going to have to send her back if she doesn't start behaving herself. She stays in a crib until she's like 8 years old, so that try to keep her from wandering around the house at night. And she's still wetting the bed, of course. Uses a bottle sometimes when her mommy wants to make her feel ashamed of herself. When she goes to school, she has to wear little boys' undershirts over her, and she wears this thing called leggings that look like, well, I guess they were like pantyhose back then, but they were for little girls and they were flesh-colored. And what it did was it hid the bruises and the marks, so nobody at school knew that she had bruises. They just knew that she wore these funny clothes and made fun of her. But that was part of life too, being the odd one, being different from other kids. But at least she was special, because that's what the doctors and the men always and the soldiers always told her, that you're special. So life pretty much goes on, only the older she gets, the worse it gets. And the harder it is to please the daddies. And by the time she's 13, her adopted daddy, who never really did anything to stop it, and she's pretty sure didn't really know what was going on, but never really asked, and was scared to death of his own wife. He dies, and she feels very bad about that, and they tell her that it's her fault that he died. It was just another way to control her. I forgot to tell you about the visit that before she went away to camp, that camp in the woods, in the mountains. The man, Mr. Fenner, the chairman of the board of Tulane, who she used to call the Magister. When she went across the lake to the camp, she'd have to call him the Magister because she couldn't call him Mr. Fenner because they all wore masks and costumes and didn't know who each other was, supposedly, and the children weren't supposed to know who they were. But they wore Mardi Gras costumes, and so that wasn't strange because, hey, everybody knows about Mardi Gras. It's just that it didn't seem to be Mardi Gras time, and yet they wore costumes. But anyhow, he had paid a visit to Monster Mom one day, and right in front of the little girl, as if she was just a part of the furniture, he says words like, need to toughen her up, pain, water, punishment, lock her in the closet, dark, need to toughen her up. That's all she remembers. And after that, Monster Mom got pretty bad at home, and when she got punished, she got really punished. And life was pretty bad, but then again, it was pretty good because she didn't have to really go through all of it because she had her imaginary friends to help her, and she got to go away. That's what she called it, going away and hiding in her safe place. And so by the time she was 16, Monster Mom dies, finally. And everybody goes, oh, poor little thing, losing your mother and you're only 16. And she's so happy inside, but she has to cry and look sad and everything. But that still doesn't mean she doesn't have to go for treatments, and still doesn't mean that she doesn't have to go to the hotel rooms that these people that work for the government, that work for the president, well, they keep these fancy rooms at these 2 hotels in New Orleans, and she had been trained, remember when she was 9 years old, how to please the daddies. So daddies would come from all over, and she would go in the room and spend the night with them, or spend a couple of hours with them. And she was even showed by the Captain White, who wore a gun and came from California. She was shown how they had 2 bathrooms in the room. One bathroom was hidden, and it was behind a mirror, and there was a camera behind the mirror, and it was always opposite the bed. And the room didn't look any different from the other rooms, except that it was a fancy room. And so the people from out of town and politicians, just about anybody you could think of, would stay there, and she would have to, stay with them. And she had to do a good job, and she had to get them to talk about themselves, and she always had to make sure that they looked into the mirror. But she was another big secret about the camera. The Martini Man, that's what she called the man that took the pictures, the movies. He said it was a job, and she was doing it for a country that she couldn't tell. So she always had to, she had to remember all these things. So it's a good thing she had a good memory. But anyhow, so this goes on until she graduates from high school, and then when she goes to pick her college, she tries to get as far away from New Orleans as she can. She doesn't even know why. She just knows, I got to get out of here. So she goes away, and she goes to college, and it got a lot better. And she only had to see the doctors and the daddies like every now and then. It wasn't as often. And her monster mom wasn't there, so a lot of times she would just run away and hide, take the car and go someplace and go to a friend's house or something and hide out. But she still had to go back, and mainly do her job, being in the movies with the men and getting them to talk about themselves, because it was, quote, ammunition to use against them if they ran out of money. And all she knew was that Tulane needed a lot of money for some reason, and this was how they made sure they kept the money coming. Was they had these films that went to somebody in Virginia, and they kept them in. If the people didn't want to give any more money for the, quote, projects, then I guess they would tell them, well, we have this film. Anyhow, so imagine this little girl 40 years later walking into this exclusive hotel called the Madison in Washington, D.C., and although she's all grown up now, doesn't have any children because they made sure that she couldn't have kids, so they didn't have to bother with her getting pregnant. She walks in and she's just one of the crowd, one of the audience, and just a nameless face, but she feels like she looks like that. That's what she feels like. She feels so little and scared and fragile, sort of like scared, like nervous, like I am. So she goes in, but when she leaves the room, her life is never the same again, because she's been asked to give testimony in front of a presidential committee on radiation.
I'm speaking with Claudia Mullen, a survivor of U.S. government mind control experimentation and operation. Thanks very much for joining us today, Claudia.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me on the show.
Now, we had heard some of your testimony that was given on the presidential hearings on radiation experiments in 1995. How did you get involved in testifying at those hearings?
Well, I'll tell you, it came about because of the information that I had given my therapist as the memories started coming back to me, and it was obvious that it was more than just abuse by my mother and even ritual abuse here in New Orleans, that it involved some kind of government, conspiracy, or the information was sent out by my therapist to some experts across the country to be verified, to see if these people did exist, if there were such projects that I was naming names that I had no idea who these people were. My therapist didn't know who they were because she doesn't do any reading on this type of, any kind of mind control issues or government conspiracy, that type of thing.
So she sent your material out to people that have done research into the
yes,
into the
that she knew was doing research on this,
right?
Specifically on CIA projects, and they were sending back, yes, that these people did exist, that I was giving information that was not published yet or had only been published through Freedom of Information Act, which I had not filed, obviously. This information was also sent along to a man named Wally Cummings, who was in charge of obtaining speakers, not speakers, but people to give testimony in the Washington hearings.
And was he part of the radiation committee?
He wasn't actually part of the committee. It was his job to interview, to find people that, for the public testimony part.
Right. So he worked for the committee then?
Yeah, he worked for the committee.
Mm-hmm.
And he was interviewing and, finding people that, had something to say. And so he interviewed me over the phone. And he had heard that I had been giving some testimony. Had been giving some information that obviously was valid and had to do with radiation. And so he asked me if I would be willing to testify. And this was about 2 weeks before we were asked to testify. I mean, before we actually had to testify. So I had about 2 weeks' notice. And I was told that I could speak for 10 minutes and give as much information as I could. And so I decided to do it. And I went to Washington and testified, along with my therapist and one of her other clients.
What was the connection then between the radiation experiments and mind control experiments that were done to you?
Okay, well, I had heard a lot about, when I was part of the experiments, they didn't necessarily use a lot of radiation on me other than to take x-rays, to keep me healthy, to check for, damage, broken bones. But I did overhear quite a bit about radiation experiments they were doing, especially in New Orleans, or outside of New Orleans. And so, obviously, it was the same people doing the radiation experiments that were doing the experiments on me. So that was the connection.
Now, this was an incredibly brave thing to go to the presidential hearings to give testimony. And were you aware that you were, in effect, breaking the silence for a lot of other survivors of mind control at the time?
At the time, not really. I didn't realize that we were... I didn't realize what a step we were taking. It sort of was the type of thing that you just jump in and do without thinking too much about it, because you're afraid if you think too long and too hard about it, you might change your mind. And you know it's important, but you're not really sure why it's important at the time. You just know that you need to talk about it, and you need to let people know that it did happen. And so, at the time, I didn't feel very brave about it. I was pretty scared, but, and I didn't realize the repercussions and what it would mean as far as opening the door for other mind control victims to be able to come forward and talk. At the time, I had no idea what it was going to lead to. I just knew that it was important to do, and I was being given an opportunity to talk to people in Washington and tell them that these things had happened and that they shouldn't have happened. And so I did it. I sort of jumped in and did it without thinking.
And how did it feel, the actual experience of giving testimony at the committee?
Oh, pretty scary.
Mm-hmm.
It felt good afterwards. It was pretty, overwhelming. I'd say it's the best word to describe it. They were very nice to us. You felt like you were being, looked under a microscope, though. Everything that you said was being torn apart and looked at very carefully, and you were questioned a lot, but we kind of expected that. But afterwards, it was such a feeling of relief and surprise. Actually, I was very surprised afterwards at the response that we had. I walked into the room and I was just a face, you know. Nobody even knew who I was. Well, there were obviously people there from the government. There were CIA people there. There were military. And it was pretty frightening, you know. But I was kind of lost in the crowd. And when I walked out, everybody knew who I was. And there was so much support, especially from the other radiation victims that I testified. And from the committee themselves. They were very supportive.
So you felt that they had received your information and were seriously taking the information that we're hearing seriously from you?
Yes, I did.
And was there any follow-up on the part of the committee, or what was that follow-up as it pertains to the mind control?
Well, the reason that I know that they actually listened, even though the recommendations were mainly for the radiation experiments and strictly radiation, and that was what they were looking at. But I know that they listened to us also, because part of the recommendation, which came out in October of '95, was that these particular projects be looked into, and they were all the MK Ultra projects that I had named, and that I had given. We were able to give as much testimony in writing as we wanted to. We were only allowed to talk for a certain amount of time, but we could hand in as much information as we could, you know, give them. And so I'd handed in, you know, I don't know, like 20 pages, listing project numbers, names, sub-project numbers, subjects, places, people. And these were actually the project names and numbers that I gave were actually recommended that these files be opened.
Those particular projects?
Mm-hmm. The list that I gave was on there. Now, they haven't actually done it yet.
Right.
And I'm told that the reason is because they're waiting for the people involved, for everyone to have died. To be quite frank, that's what they said.
Who had told you this?
They didn't tell me this, of course. Oh. Nobody got back to us. I found out actually over the internet, but I spoke to one of the experts that has been filing Freedom of Information Acts in my name for these projects that, you know, that I had named, and he said that he was told directly by the CIA that they did not want to start any real investigation on this until all the people had passed away, because they felt like the public would react too strongly, and that the CIA didn't need this right now, or something.
Well, public would react strongly, and rightly so. Was there any press coverage at all after giving testimony, or any press contacting you afterwards?
I think there was a brief story, you know, in the Washington paper, but like I said, the emphasis was on the radiation and on that testimony. But yeah, there was coverage in local cable shows. We did an interview that night for a local cable access television station in Montana, and of course it was all over the internet afterwards. But not much national coverage, no. Like I said, the emphasis was on the radiation.
And I understand journalist John Rappaport had compiled your testimony and the other survivors' testimony in a book. How soon afterwards did that happen? And did you have...
immediately. I mean, he came out with a book within, I think, 6 months.
Right.
It's called U.S. Mind Control Experiments on Children They Want to Know.
Right.
By John Rappaport. And also, I was contacted by several other people from, one from 2020, and at the time they wanted my therapist and I to appear on a show, and my therapist turned it down, so I turned it down. And a couple of other people, one man from Washington, a columnist, I did an interview with. I did an interview with an attorney. So I did some interviews that probably got into local newspapers, but I never really saw them.
Right.
So there were people calling from all over the country. And I had left my number, my therapist's number, as my number in Washington, because people were coming up and asking for a card or how to contact me. And at the time, I knew I was taking a risk, so I didn't want to give any personal information, so I gave my therapist phone number and address, and that's how they contacted me.
Right.
Now,
Now,
I did get some interviews over the phone.
With newspapers again?
And the BBC, too.
Oh, yes.
The BBC did an interview.
And was anything done with that interview?
Yeah, they're still working on the complete show that they're doing. They said it's going to take several years to finish. Ours is just a small part of it. But it's Jan Klimkowski is the man's name that's doing the show.
Right. I wonder if you can describe briefly how you were introduced into these experimental programs.
Well, I'd say, to my knowledge, I was first introduced in 1958. I was about 8 years old, and I had already been, I'd been adopted at 2.5. My adopted mother had been abusing me from the day she adopted me. She allowed her friends to abuse me, and I was sent to a camp where there was, it was mainly a sex ring, I guess you would call it, or a bunch of pedophiles that got together on weekends and holidays and passed kids around. And these same people apparently let the government know, the people from the government that were looking for subjects for children to use in experiments, that's where they would look, in sex rings and adoption agencies. I think they had been looking at me long before the time I was 8 years old, but they were waiting for me to get to a certain age, I guess, to use me. So I first knew about it when I was 8, and I was told that I was going to be tested by some people from the government at Tulane University, and that it was very important, and it was to help stop communism. And I vaguely knew what communism was and that it was a bad thing. So I tried to do the best I could, and I thought I was doing a good thing.
Now, you had mentioned that your mother had known some people at Tulane. What was the connection there?
Well, my mother knew the chairman of the board of Tulane University Medical School, Darwin Fenner. He was in New Orleans society. He was probably, the highest in society that you could get. And my mother was a real social climber. And so she pretty much offered me to Darwin Fenner for anything that he wanted to use me for. And he was the one that ran this camp. It was called the Covington Camp for Boys and Girls. And it was actually his summer home in north of the Lake Pontchartrain, near New Orleans. And I was sent over there, and they would dress up in Mardi Gras costumes, because we were used to Mardi Gras, and they do kind of ceremonies. But it was mainly just to scare us, the ceremonies.
What kind of ceremonies?
And he was also good friends with Robert Heath, Dr. Robert Heath, who was head of the neuropsychiatric department at Tulane. And I believe Darwin Fenner wanted to get the grant money that the CIA was offering if Tulane would allow them to use the place for experiments. And so, since he already knew about me, and they were looking for children that are already abused, that's how I got involved, I guess.
Right, and how long did this abuse and experimentation go on with you, with Tulane University?
Oh, well, it went on pretty steadily, quite frequently, until I graduated from high school. in 68. And then after that, it was more intermittent because I was away from home. My mother had died. It was hard to get a hold of me, but they still could contact me, and I still had to go in. And this went on until probably the last time that I remember actually being involved in anything that had to do with the government was 1988. And I was already 38 years old. And they were still using me.
So some 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
After this, what were you doing in your life? Were you able to work, or were you going to school?
You see, I had developed DID, or multiple personality disorder, as a very small child, even before I was adopted. Because at the agency where I was, or the orphanage, it was, there were just so many babies and so few people to take care of us that I guess I started splitting as a natural process to kind of to nurture myself, because there wasn't anybody there to do it for me. And so I'd already started splitting back then. And I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Could you repeat the question again?
What were you working after?
Oh, right. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So since I had MPD or DID, this allowed me to lead a apparently normal life. Go to school. I went to college after high school. I dated. I went into veterinary medicine, became a veterinary technician for 12 and a half years, and pretty much, led an apparently normal life, except for the times that they would get a hold of me, and then they would use the multiple personality. They would contact one of my personalities that would respond to them, and she would go, back to Tulane or wherever they wanted me to go. But otherwise, I was leading pretty much a life like anybody else, dated, got married, went to nursing school, and I was just graduated from nursing school the last time, like in 1988, when I told you they used me at some convention they had here in New Orleans.
Now, when did you first realize that you did have dissociative identities? Did that manifest itself in different ways, apart from the ways they were using you?
Okay, well, when I was 7 years old, that's the first real distinct memory I have of knowing that I had children living inside of me. Imaginary friends, I called them.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought everyone did. And these friends looked different than I did. They had names. I had named them. Some were stronger than me. Some were taller. Some were more outgoing, whereas I was a very shy little girl. And so I was aware that there were these kids living inside me, and I thought everyone did. As I got older, I sort of repressed the idea of having imaginary friends. I just sort of forgot about it. And when they came out, I had no knowledge that they were coming out. And then in 1992, when something happened to me that actually brought all these memories back, then I was diagnosed with MPD. And, of course, I rejected that right away. I denied it, except for the imaginary friends that I said everybody has those. I was really adamant about not having MPD, but after a while there was no getting around the fact that I did.
So how many, do you have an idea of how many identities that were created or that you created within yourself?
I had close to 100, and all but 23 have integrated.
So you still have about 23
yes.
identities. Can you tell us about some of the identities and whether they have helped you in some way, or
Oh, yeah,
you've helped
they've all
them,
helped me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's why they were created, was to help me,
right.
To help me survive. I had each identity or each personality is created at a time of trauma. That's the only way that they can be created. That's the only way you can split yourself is during a traumatic incident. And that person or that identity comes out in order to do a job for you. In other words, to take pain. If you have to do something that goes completely against your nature, then you create someone to do that for you, because obviously you can't do it. If you have to act a certain way and you can't do it yourself, you create someone to do it. It's not a conscious thing, it's an unconscious process, but they're all helpful in the sense that they do something for me that I can't do for myself. I have one that gets very, very angry. She can get, she would come out at times when I could just get furious at my monitor or different people that were hurting me, and she would come out kicking and screaming and trying to bite them. And but myself, I couldn't get angry. I was afraid to get angry, so that's why I had Leslie. She's the one who gets angry. So they all help in the sense that they do something that I'm not capable of doing. But they cannot go against my inherent nature. In other words, none of them would do anything that I would feel is inherently wrong, like to kill somebody. They do things that I'm not capable of doing just because I can't bring myself to do it, but I don't think there's none of them that are bad. Mm-hmm. They're all good.
What was it that started bringing the memories back?
In October of 1992, something happened to me that was completely unrelated to any of this, and I'm told that a lot of victims of child abuse throughout their lives becomes victims of crime, of violent crime, simply because these perpetrators look for people that look like victims. And I became a victim of aggravated rape in my house. I was a nurse working nights, and I came home in the morning, and there was a man waiting for me. And it was pretty traumatic, and I didn't tell anyone at first. I tried to handle it, and obviously I couldn't. I became suicidal and depressed and suicidal, and eventually had to. I told the police. And the police recommended me to a therapist, and they recommended me to the therapist that I have now, that I've always had.
Valerie Wolf?
And mainly because she was an expert witness, and they wanted to use her in the trial against the man who had raped me.
I see.
And
so you were going forward and pressing charges at that time, or?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it took 2.5 years to go to trial. And during that time, I was in therapy, and that's when the memories started coming back. I would say probably about 6 months after the incident happened, these memories started coming that had nothing to do with the rape. Obviously things that happened when I was a child. And at first it was just my mother that I remembered, the way she abused me. And then it would be people that I remember from my childhood. And then it started to be memories of strangers, people that I didn't know, mainly doctors, people in uniforms, military uniforms. I would be in a place that I don't remember ever going to, like Maryland. I never thought I'd been to Maryland, and I was having memories of being there, and these people hurting me, doing things to me, taking tests, being in front of a large group of an audience of people, and having to perform different things. And these are the kind of memories that started coming back, and they came back very fast. Once the memories start, once you're triggered to remember, they don't come out in a timely fashion. They just come crashing out. And you're so overwhelmed that if you're not in therapy already, then you end up in the hospital, probably because of a suicide attempt. Because that's the first thing you want to do is kill yourself. before you even want to, before you can deal with this.
Right.
Because nobody wants to believe this really happened to them. And then when the memories are so real and so vivid that it must have happened, and then you check out information and find out that this place does exist, that this person was a real person, then there's no way of getting around the fact that it was a real memory. You try everything you can to prove that they're false, that it didn't really happen, that you made this person up in your mind. But when it's proved to you that they are real, accurate memories, then you have to start dealing with it. And the first thing you do is deny it, and then you try to get away from it. And
so was it you or your therapist that were attempting to verify what information you were remembering?
At first, neither one of us did. The memories just started coming, and then after a while I started saying, well, these didn't happen, you can't prove that they happened. And so I started writing all this information down, or my alters, my shadows, I call them, would come out, and they would write down conversations they overheard. They would write down descriptions of places I had been to, things that had happened to me. And they would write it as sort of a letter to me. Remember, Claudia, remember when this happened. Remember when this colonel came to see us, and they would describe the man, give part of his name. We would remember whole conversations of things. And so she finally said, well, I guess we should start trying to find out if this is real or not. She actually didn't try to at first, because she said that the whole purpose of therapy is not so much to find out if it's real or not, but to deal with what's coming, what you're remembering, and try to get through it and process it and get past it. It's not really to find out if it's true or not. It doesn't really matter. If it's happening to you, then it's real enough to you. So I wanted to know whether it was real or not. I wanted to know if these people existed. And she had no idea. She had never heard of any of them. She wasn't familiar with the places I was talking about. So she had to send it out to people, all over the country. And she started getting responses back that, yes, she's describing so-and-so. Yes, he was known to be involved in CIA government experiments. And they started calling me and asking me specific questions. And then I would describe people that I, accurately, people I supposedly had never met, people that had died years ago. I described the inside of places that supposedly I'd never been to, and yet I could describe the inside, what room I'd gone to, what it looked like, things like that. That's how it was verified.
And did you or other people actually go to revisit any of these places you were describing?
I went to a few with my therapist. I would never recommend going back to any place where abuse happened by yourself, because you immediately go into a flashback when you go back to someplace. We went to some places around New Orleans that I had been to. One was a camp, an arsenal, that's now a police training facility, and they allowed us to go in and look around. And it was called Nichols, Camp Nichols, and it's in New Orleans. And Dr. Green, L. Wilson Green, used to stay there when he was in New Orleans. I found out later that it was sort of a place where military people could stay when they came to New Orleans, and it also doubled as an arsenal. And we went there. I went to back to Tulane, which was pretty scary because that's where a lot of the stuff happened. And I kept, I showed her the room. I said, it's room 302, third floor, Tulane. And I described what the hall would look like, what was on the wall. And sure enough, a lot of it was the same. Of course, there were empty rooms. They weren't being used, but it was exactly the way I described it. And then some of the people that verified the information actually went to different places. And The only place they couldn't get into was Edgewood Arsenal in Fort Detrick, Maryland.
And you remember being experimented on within Edgewood
Yes.
Arsenal?
Yeah, I had been there, and I could describe the place, but very few people have been inside of it. And it did turn out that one of the people that was verifying the information that I sent interviewed some. They would interview different people, and a couple of times they interviewed people that I actually remember from my childhood that remembered me. Only they remembered me as Crystal Stone, which was my name back then. That's what they called me in the experiments, Crystal Stone. And this man interviewed several people, and one had actually been inside Edgewood and remembered a portrait of Dr. Green that was on the wall. And she said the description that I gave of him was exactly like the picture, that he looked just like the picture. And then he interviewed another man, a doctor, that had come to see me at Tulane, but had walked out and refused to take part in the experiment because they were using electric shock on me. And I was about 13 at the time. And he was furious. He said, "Nobody told me that you were using children." And he refused to participate. And when he was interviewed by this man, the doctor remembered, "Oh yeah, I remember a little blonde-haired girl, skinny blonde-haired girl named Crystal." And so that was sort of verification. But he's asked not to be named.
Okay. Just to reiterate, when you first approached the police about the rape that happened, what did you start remembering at that point before you got in contact with Valerie Wolf?
Oh, actually, as far as any of this stuff, I didn't remember anything. I was mainly having nightmares about the rape. I did try to contact some people from my childhood that I thought had been, one was a family friend, a doctor who I thought had been a family friend who had been someone I had always gone to when I had a problem. And it turns out he was my monitor or controller. He was the one who was supposed to keep track of me my whole life and make sure that my memories didn't start coming back. And when they did, he would take me back to Tulane. But I remembered him as a good person, like an uncle. And then I did call Dr. Robert Heath because I remembered him from my childhood as a doctor I'd gone to see. And I remembered him as being a kindly old man that, had always treated me nice. I didn't even remember what kind of doctor he was. I just knew the name, and I looked it up in the phone book, and I called him, and he said I needed to come in. And he remembered me, But actually, after the rape, it wasn't until I was in the hospital about 3 months later that I started having flashbacks of other people hurting me, other men. Not the rapist, but, other people.
Right.
And everybody, my doctor, and the nurses, and everybody was really confused because most people that are being treated for a recent trauma, you have flashbacks of that trauma, but you don't have flashbacks of something else. And I was getting worse instead of better, I was on all this medication, different group therapies, and I was being hospitalized on suicide watch, and I wasn't getting any better. I was getting worse. I escaped a couple of times, but they got me back.
From the hospital?
And the way the memories start coming back is they deliberately do this. They layer them, the memories, so that you'll remember memories of your, like family memories. Like I remembered my mother abusing me. And then you remember things that don't, that don't have anything to do with, nothing to do with Tulane or any outside doctors. It was just, I thought I was abused by my mother and her friends. Mm-hmm. And then I remembered the camp across the lake, and that led to remembering Tulane, and that led to remembering the other places I had been to, and it just sort of snowballs. And they keep coming, one after another. It's really hard to live while you're getting all these memories back. And if I didn't have personalities, I probably wouldn't be alive, because they came out and, when you go into these memories, you can't just say, okay, well, I don't want to remember tonight, I want to eat dinner. You can't do that. So you go away and let someone else come out, and they can eat for you, or sleep, or, so you're not in a constant flashback.
How did going to therapy at the time help you cope with dealing with all of these memories coming back?
Well, it kept me safe, for one thing. Valerie made sure that, I had to make a contract with her that I wouldn't hurt myself, or if I thought about hurting myself, I would tell her first. She had to make a contract with each of the personalities that were coming out, the ones that came out the most. Not everybody comes out at once. Obviously, if I have almost 100 personalities, they're not all going to be coming out at once, but over the years they come out. And some only come out one time, and then that's it, they integrate. They come back, they come out to give you a memory, and then they go inside you and integrate, because their job is done. Mm-hmm. But the therapy kept me going. I mean, from day to day. There were lots of nights I'd end up calling her in the middle of the night, and she tried to contain the flashbacks. That's the worst part, is the flashbacks, because you actually are in the memory as if it's happening right then and there. And my husband would try to get me out of the flashback, and I would think he was the person hurting me, and I would fight him. So, it more or less, it's a safety thing. You need to stay safe, and you don't want to be drugged all the time. So, and you don't want to be in the hospital all the time. So, therapy is really important.
Can you describe the approach that your therapist took with you to help you heal and to help you remember?
Okay, well, I guess the first part of healing is the remembering part, and what she does for that is really just be there. She doesn't encourage you to remember. You start remembering and you can't help it, and she'll just sort of be there and saying, what else do you remember? Just sort of someone to give you memory to remember, and tell someone that believes you, because that's a big part of it, is having someone believe you, because it's important to you. You remember this awful stuff, and once you get past the point of denying it, and you understand that it did happen, then you need someone else to believe that it happened. It's just part of the healing process. And so she was there to, to help me remember it, to stay safe while I remembered it, because, like I said, it's actually as if you're going through the whole incident itself. I mean, you feel the pain, the body pain, whatever happened to you then, you feel the same pain, you feel like you're being held down, or whatever it is that's happening. You can actually feel, like if you're tied down, you can feel the ties on you. You can feel it against your skin. It's a very weird sensation. I mean, it's almost like you're hallucinating, but you're not. You're just trapped back in this memory, and she keeps you from hurting yourself, from running out the door, which you try to do. You try to escape, because you come in and out of the memory. It's not a constant thing. You're in the process of remembering something awful, and somehow you'll click in. You're the here and now will click in, and you say, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to get the hell out of here. And you start running for the door. And she's had to catch me, and obviously keep me safe inside of a room. A lot of people can only do this in a hospital. Well, I was lucky. I have a therapist who does it outside of the hospital, because it's not a very good environment for doing it, being in a hospital. It's much easier to do it in some place familiar that's more like a second home to you this hospital environment, because a lot of the stuff did happen in hospitals. So that's the last place I want to be.
Right.
And like I said, verifying the memories afterwards, after it's all over with, and you finished it, then you talk about it, you process it, and then I would ask her, please try to find out, was there a man named James Hamilton from California? Was there ever a doctor by this name? Is there such a place as Vacaville, California? Something like that. And so she would call her consultant, call these people that were experts and say, okay, well, this is the information she gave me. Because she would have no idea, She purposely didn't read any of the material that was being published. Because she didn't want to accidentally contaminate my memories, by giving me any information. So she says as little as possible during the thing, other than encouraging me to talk, and basically hanging on to you sometimes.
Now, there's been some material published about the describing traumatic memory and in the different way that it's processed inside the brain as opposed to regular memory, in that it does kind of take you back to that raw experience, and including body memories, and that sounds like what was your experience as well.
Right. That's good. Raw experience. That's a good description.
Did you find that you had to relive all of the memories that in order to integrate that identity that had that memory, or were there other ways of dealing with it?
Well, I'm told that not everyone does their memories differently. Everyone heals in a different way. For me in particular, it's important for me to go through the memory. Why, I don't know. If I had my choice, I would say, I don't want to do any of the memories. I just want to talk about it and say, well, this happened on such and such a day, and I was 12 years old, and this, I would rather talk about it, of course, rather than experience it. But for some reason, I can't put it behind me and go on and deal with it unless I've actually gone through it again. Only this time when you're going through it, you do have a sense that it happened a long time ago, that the person's not really there anymore, and that you're safe. That's the only difference. You do have this, sensation that Valerie's there, the therapist is there. Even though you're caught back in a different time and a different place, you still have this sense of this person who's safe, and that she's not going to let them, really hurt you, and that this person's not going to come back and get you, and that no one else knows about it, that it's, private. But for me, I have to experience the memory. I have to get the full memory from the shadow that experienced it at the time. She gives it to me, and then she goes inside or integrates. And that's where most of my shadows have gone, once they gave me the memory to integrate it.
Right. And just to clarify for our listeners, when you're saying she, that you're really meaning other identities within yourself.
Yes.
Right.
They're all, yes, my identities or alters, and I call them shadows. So when I say shadows, I mean my alters, are all little girls. The oldest is 16 years old, and the youngest is a year old. And that's out all 100 of them. They were all little girls. And I don't have any boys, men, animals, objects, robots, anything like that other people have. Mine are just me at different ages. And I might have 5 that are 10 years old, So that's why I have so many. Because there were some years when it was really bad and things happened a lot. And I missed most of that year of school. And it's a miracle that I passed school, that I never was held back a grade. And we actually went back and checked my school records, and that verified some of the information, because we found the records the days that I missed of school, and they coincided with my memory. And I missed almost every Thursdays and Fridays. I missed a lot of Thursdays and Fridays because I would go away for the weekend, you know. I don't have any pictures of me at any birthday because I was always sent away for my birthday. I don't have any pictures of Christmas, but I have lots of pictures of me at Easter time because I was always home for Easter because Easter's a big Catholic holiday, and I was raised Catholic, and of course you have to be at church on Easter Sunday or people will ask questions. But for some reason on Christmas nobody asked any questions, and I was always gone during Christmas. But for other people, they don't have to go through the memory. They can just talk about it. For myself, I had to go through each one. Almost every single one that I had. There's very few that I'm able to just process and talk about and not have to experience it again. I guess it makes it real for me. I guess that's why I have to do it.
Mm-hmm. And how long has your healing process been so far? Are you still in therapy now? Or?
Yes, I am, but I'm back at work now, almost full-time as a nurse, and I was out of work 4.5 years when I wasn't able to, I was on disability because I was in therapy so much, almost every day of the week, except the weekend. I was unable to work. I was just too exhausted. I was on medication. Now I'm going to therapy once, maybe twice a week. And it's mainly just processing, talking about all the things that happened, talking about how I feel about the people. I've already gotten all the memories back, so that part is over. The worst is over. Actually having to remember it in every detail, that's done already. And that happened during, I'd say, the spring of '93 until right before Christmas of this year.
So when you actually gave testimony at the radiation hearings, you were, only about halfway through? Remembering everything?
A little more than halfway through the memories.
Mm-hmm.
So if I gave the testimony now, it would be a lot more accurate, a lot more detailed, a lot more names, places, because there were things I hadn't even remembered yet. But it was enough that that could be validated and enough that they were interested in. Thank goodness.
Now, you also have a photographic memory.
I have a shadow who has a photographic memory.
I see.
So I can use a photographic memory, but I don't have access to it at all times. In other words, Claudia doesn't have the photographic memory. A part of me does.
Uh-huh.
I don't have it 100% of the time. But I used it a lot when I was growing up because unconsciously it was very important for me to remember everything that happened to me, every name, every face. I wanted to remember these people that were hurting me. I didn't know why I wanted to remember. Maybe I thought unconsciously that there'd be somebody to tell someday, somebody that would listen to me. Because they were always telling you not to tell, that it was a secret. That horrible things would happen if you told anybody. And I did try to tell twice as I was growing up. Tried to tell 2 different people, and both times I got punished for it. So I learned my lesson that you didn't tell anybody.
Who were these people that you had told?
When I was 7, I told the school nurse. I had been to camp the weekend before, to Mr. Fenner's camp across the lake, and had a really rough time. And I was bleeding vaginally. I had bruises, scrapes all over me, and my mother would send me to school with this leotards, flesh-colored leotards on, and stockings, like a little ballet suit, only it was flesh-colored. And I would wear that under my uniform so that it hid all the bruises and the scrapes and everything. And she'd put like a pad on me, like adults would, like you use for your period. And she sent me to school. And I went to the school nurse because my teacher thought I looked really pale and not feeling well. And so she sent me to the nurse, and I told the nurse, she said, "Who did this to you? Or how did this happen to you?" Because she saw I was bleeding and everything, and I had a temperature, I had a fever. And I said, "My mother did." And she said, well, no, really, how did it happen? And I said, my mother did it. And she let this man do something to me, and I don't want to go home. And so she told me to lay down and take a nap, and that she would take care of it. And I thought she was going to call the police and have my mother arrested. And instead she called my mother to come pick me up, and she said, I thought you ought to know what your daughter was saying about you.
Jeez.
And, of course, I missed school after that for a few days because she took it out on me.
Your mother punished you.
And then when I was 14, I told somebody. And once again, they told my mother. No, actually, they told my monitor, Dr. Brown, the family friend who was keeping an eye on me, who was best friends with Mr. Fenner and also with Robert Heath from Tulane. And he was friends with a lot of the people from the CIA, too. He actually worked with Martin Orne in the 50s, so he was friends with him. And I told him what was happening. I said, bad things are happening. I don't want to go home. I don't want to go to see doctors anymore. And, of course, he punished me. And then he told my mother. So that was the only 2 times I ever told anybody something was going on. And then I learned my lesson not to tell. But I kept everything filed away in my photographic memory. I remembered whole conversations, what everybody looked like, what they were wearing, what they sounded like, what the places looked like, what it felt like, everything. And that's why I've been able to give so much information. It's not just blurs of vague things that happen to me. It's very detailed, and I'm told that that's not very common, that most people don't remember a lot of details. They remember the feelings and the pain and the sensations, but they don't remember small details. They try not to. So I'm told that's kind of unusual.
I wonder if we could go into some of these details that you do remember. If you could talk about some of the people involved in the experiments.
Okay. Since there was so many, you have to tell me, like, a little more detail. Like,
maybe
what
you could.
kinds do you want to know about, or at what age?
Maybe you could go chronologically. What kind of experiments were they doing at the start, and who was involved, and if you knew what the different projects were at the time.
Okay, well, like I told you before, when I was 8 years old, I was told I was going to be tested to see if I could participate or take part in this big project, and they kept calling it projects. And it was for the President of the United States, and it was to help stop communism, and it sounded very exciting. And so these people, I was told the doctors and these important people were going to come from all over the country to test me. And I mainly was at Tulane for the test. And some of the tests were like, they gave me personality tests. And usually if it was a man, well, it was mostly men that were involved. There was one woman that I remember distinctly, and Phyllis Greenacre. She was from a place called Cornell. I didn't even know that was a school at the time. I just remembered the word Cornell. And but the rest of them were men, and most of them would say, call me Uncle so-and-so. So Uncle John came from Oklahoma and tested me for personality to see. He had names for different types of tests, but basically I think what he was testing was to see how my personality, who I would fit in best with, who I'd get along with the best. I think they already had an idea of what they wanted to use me for, but they had to see specifically what I would be most useful, how I could help the projects the most. And he tested me and said that I got along best with older men, daddies or uncles, that that's what I was looking for, affection from older men. Because in my own life, my mother was so dominant and so horrible, you know, and scary, and my father was real sickly. My adopted father was sickly and very weak, never stood up to my mother, knew what was going on, never stopped it. And so here I was looking for this strong man to come along and save me. And so that's why I guess I reacted best with older men. So his name was Uncle John, and he was also known as the Gittinger Man. I had to remember these people by characteristics they had, or by the clothes they wore, or by maybe something they talked about, or something odd about them, because there were so many people coming and going in my life, it would have been impossible just to remember names and put faces with them and where they were from. So I would call them by different nicknames, and John Gittinger was the goatee man, because I asked him, I told him he had a funny-looking beard, and he said it's called a goatee. And the first time I'd ever heard that expression, a goatee. So I called him the goatee man. And then there was a Dr. Uncle Sid, who was Gottlieb. And I called him the man with the pebble in his shoe, because he walked funny. He had a limp. And he mainly just talked to me. I don't know what he specifically was looking for, but he just wanted to get an idea of what I was like and how I reacted. Did I obey what, you know, was I obedient? Did I have, they would test me for memory. And of course I had a very good memory, and that was important. They did IQ test. And then I mentioned Phyllis Greenacre before. They had to test me. She tested me for sexual type things to see how I responded sexually. She determined that I did not respond well to women because of the experiences with my mother. I hated women touching me, examining me or anything, but it wasn't so bad with men because, obviously the women reminded me of my mother. And Phyllis Greenacre reminded me of my mother, and so I couldn't stand her. And she decided that, and I heard them talking afterwards. I'd be sitting in the room, and they would talk about what they had found, like I wasn't even there. I guess I wasn't supposed to understand the words. I was only 8 years old, so I guess they figured she's not going to know what we're talking about. So they didn't bother to take me out of the room. And she said that I would respond to older men, and I responded quickly to physical stimulation, and they would actually stimulate you in different ways and see what would happen.
You mean sexually?
Yes. Mm-hmm. They actually had machines with wires and tubes coming out of them, and they would insert them inside of you, and then they would stimulate you or something, and they could give you like a score, how you responded. I guess in terms of how much. I know it sounds really weird, but
so this was all done when you were around 8 years old, or? I
was 8 years old. For a whole year, I was brought back and forth to Tulane, and I was tested for all sorts of things. I had to do to see how easily I was hypnotized, and there were several people that tested me for that. One of them was Martin Orne, and I called him the Orne Man, and I just knew that I called him the Weasel. He reminded me of a weasel for some reason. His eyes did, or I don't know. He was very scary, though. And he hypnotized me, and they said that I hypnotized easily and rapidly. They could induce me rapidly, is what they called it. And I think that was the main criteria. You had to have a certain IQ. You had to have an excellent memory. You You had to be able to be hypnotized easily and quickly. You had to dissociate. The imaginary friends, they were very pleased to hear about that I had imaginary friends inside, that I called the Annies. That's what I called them back then. And you had to respond well to people and be obedient, and I was. I'd always been taught, well, I mean, there wasn't any other way to behave in my life, in my world. If you weren't obedient, you got hurt. My mother had taught me that, so I was very obedient. I always listened to grown-ups and did what they told me, no matter how odd it seemed or how bad it seemed like it would be. Something really bad to do, like take all your clothes off. I didn't argue. I just did it because the consequences were bad. So those are the kind of tests.
Now, why do you think those were the factors that they were looking for within you? What did they hope to achieve by doing these things to you, in your opinion?
Looking back now, of course, at the time I had no idea. And even a year later, when I was sent off to a training camp in Maryland, I didn't really understand. But now, looking back, I know that they were looking for someone to use in sexual entrapment, blackmail. That's what they were going to use me for. And they needed someone that responded well to strangers, to men mainly, and that had a good memory, because I'd be taught at this camp. I would be taught how to get people, to coerce people into to giving a lot of information about themselves, because obviously they're talking to a child. They're doing something sexual that they're not supposed to be doing, and they're not really conscious about what they're talking about. They give away a lot of information about themselves or their job, and if you know the right questions to ask, you can get people to tell just about anything about themselves. And like Uncle Richard used to tell me, it's amazing what people will admit when they're in the presence of a young girl. They're not even thinking about the stuff that they're saying. And then what they would do is, I was sent to this training camp. Well, I was told I passed all the tests, and the next summer I was going to be sent to this camp. And I thought, oh no, camp, that's bad. But they said this was a really nice camp, and it was in Maryland. And they asked my mother for permission to send me away. And of course, she signed some papers, and she didn't even ask about it. And I was taken on a train to a place called Deep Creek Lodge in Maryland. It was beautiful. It was all surrounded by water. And to me, it was just, it was Disneyland. Only I didn't know about Disneyland then, but that's what I would compare it to. Because it was great food, and there wasn't people didn't hurt you in the same way that I was used to being hurt. They treated you like you were important, like you were special. And I was told that I was going to learn how to sexually please men. I was 9 years old. I didn't know what sexually pleased men meant, but I just knew that if I was good and behaved myself, that I could stay. I stayed for 3 weeks. It was probably the best 3 weeks of my life to that point. I was paired up with each child. There were other children there, as young as 5 or 6 years old. There were children younger than myself. And there was young women there, teenagers, all different ages, and there were some boys too. And the first couple of days, we kind of saw each other, and then after that, you were pretty much alone with one person. You were paired up with an adult, and you stayed with them for 3 weeks in a cabin, like a resort cabin. And I was told later by one of the experts that this place was a CIA training ground and also a place where people could just get away, take vacations. and it was free. If you were in the CIA, you could use it anytime. And it was also very isolated, and it was on like an island, so it was hard to get to. It was very private. Anyhow, my day consisted of being with this man called Uncle Otto. That's what he told me to call him. And he was a doctor, and he was from Kansas. And I got to choose what name I wanted to use, and I picked Ava, after Ava Gardner, because I love movie stars. And we spent the day going to the pool or just being in the room and playing games that he taught me. Most of the time I didn't have any clothes on. Some of the time he didn't have any clothes on. But after a while you learn just to ignore that kind of stuff. You weren't embarrassed anymore. And it was only one person. It wasn't like you had to be in front of all these strangers with no clothes on. So that was an improvement. They weren't really doing any horrible things where people were screaming, where there was any blood. He, of course, was molesting me, but he didn't actually rape me. So it wasn't physically painful, in that sense. So everything was kind of an improvement over what I was used to. I mean, this was a vacation. And in the evening, we would, after about a week there, and Uncle Otto taught me different things to do to sexually please men, just like they said I was going to do. And I thought they were yucky, and I didn't like doing it, but I thought, well, if this is what I have to do to not be hurt and to be treated nice and to get good food and not starve, because my mother would starve me sometimes when you went to camp. Sometimes all you had to eat was worms or something. I mean, that's all they would give you. This was definitely an improvement. And so I thought, if I have to do this yucky stuff, well, then I'm going to do it, And, of course, different shadows or alters would come out and help me so that I didn't have to always do it. After the first week, other people started coming in, other men, and what they would do is put me in a room with them. I'd have to do whatever they wanted. But it wasn't violent, it wasn't, it was mostly just molesting me kind of thing, or I would do something to them. And I knew that it was being filmed. They had showed me about the camera behind the mirror, and I had to get them to talk about themselves. And afterwards, I would go in this room, and there would be the Gottlieb man, the man with the pebble in his shoe, a man named Morgan Hall, who was really Captain White, but he called himself Morgan Hall. Morris Allen, the Morse man. Uncle Otto was there, and sometimes there would be other people there. And they would ask me to describe the person, to repeat everything that he had said to me, just pretty much to remember everything that I could about the incident. And then they would show the picture, the film they had taken, and see how well I remembered, and tell me how, well I did. Or if I forgot something important, they would point it out to me, or something I could have done better, like getting him to talk about his family more.
Did you get the sense that these other men knew about the camera behind the mirror?
Well, yeah, they all knew, because first I would talk about it, and then they would show the film. Well, they had to have taken it with a camera because it was a film of what happened that day. But
the actual the men that you were in the
with?
room with?
No, I don't think they did. No.
Did you have an idea?
I don't know who they were.
Soldiers,
maybe, I don't know. People they flew in, I guess, just to be subjects. I guess they were subjects too, I don't know. I don't know who they were, but I doubt seriously they knew there was a camera.
So
they didn't act like they knew.
So you believe that the experimentation that was done with you was for purposes for using you in sexual blackmail or entrapment?
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
And
as I got a little bit older, I was told that they were going to start using me out in the field. They called it out in the field. And but I had to be a certain age because they couldn't send a 9-year-old or even a 10-year-old to a hotel room with a man. It would be a little bit too much, I guess. So they had to wait until I got to be more like 12, 13, where they really started using me. And they told me that's what they were doing. They were going to get these people on film. Captain White told me, he was in charge of taking the film. And I called him the Martini Man because he drank martinis all the time. And they carried a gun. He said he was a policeman at one time. Anyhow, he told me what they were doing was taking pictures of the men with me because they were doing something they weren't supposed to be doing. And, of course, I knew that. I knew it was wrong. And that they had wives at home and children, and that they wouldn't want their wives to know what they did. They wouldn't want the people they worked for to know that they were talking about the job. And that's why I had to get them to talk about what they did, what kind of stuff they did, describe their family, or ask them about money. I knew that they would, whatever these people were telling me and doing to me was going to be used against them. And when I got a little older, it started to be a lot of politicians, people in the CIA, who I don't know how they didn't know that they were being filmed because they knew about those projects, but for some reason, because I guess it was a different hotel or a different place, they thought they were getting away with it and that nobody was watching them. So just about everybody got filmed eventually.
You're saying that other CIA personnel were filmed with you as well?
They got just about everybody on film except Martin Orne. He was the only one that, I guess, that wasn't about to get caught. And he made sure that he never got on film, at least that I know of. They may have gotten him with someone else, but they didn't get him with me.
Did you get a sense of what they were using these films specifically for against these people?
They said it was for money and to keep the projects going. That the most important thing was that the president wanted these projects to keep going and that they had to get the money because the CIA couldn't afford to pay for it, so other people had to pay for it. And didn't I want to keep helping the president? And of course, I said, yeah. Well, he needs money from these people. And sometimes the people decide that they don't want to give money anymore. So if we have a film and they don't want anyone to know what they did on the film, then they're going to give money. So they pretty much explained to me what they were using it for. And there were doctors and people that had foundations behind their name, so-and-so foundation, and like there was a doctor, there were a lot of people named Charles for some reason, but there was a Dr. Charles Geschecker or something like that guy, and he had a foundation or something, and he was one of the people that I got filmed with.
The Geschecker Foundation?
Huh?
The Geschecker Foundation? Was that the name?
Yeah, it started with the G, though.
Okay. Right.
His name was Charles, and he was a doctor, and he was one of those people that had a lot of money, I was told. And
so these people that were filmed were in some ways involved in funding these projects, or were coerced into funding?
Some of them were in this. I think they were afraid that maybe they would talk about the projects, and so they had to use something to keep them quiet. For instance, there was a guy named Church. All I knew was that he would try. He was very important to them because he was going to convince other people to let the projects keep going. And so they had to get something on this guy's church. And this was when I was later in high school. I was in high school by then. And supposedly he ended up talking other people into letting the projects keep going. He was supposed to be investigating to see if there was anything wrong being done by the CIA. And so he, of course, decided nothing wrong was being done because they had a film of him.
So you got the sense that this man, Church, was a politician in some way?
Yeah. I know some of them were politicians because they had senator in front of their name.
Mm-hmm. Was this Senator Church?
No. Well, I don't know if he was a senator. I just know he was Frank. Frank was his first name, and he was on some committee that was supposed to be checking on the CIA to see if what they were doing was wrong or illegal or something, and they said he was going to decide in favor of the CIA because they were going to tell him that the film would show up somewhere if he didn't. And so apparently it worked. I don't know. They kept going, so I guess it worked. There was the senator from Louisiana that I was with a couple of times, and he was kind of old. But apparently he was on one of the committees that was checking up on the CIA. They were always being checked on. That's what they told me, that people were always trying to find something bad about them to stop with the projects and to shut them down. And so they had to keep going. And if it meant hurting a few people, well, then that's what they had to do.
Did you have a sense of how often you were used for this kind of entrapment and coercion?
Well, there were certain years that I was used a lot. When I was 13 and 14, I'd say at least a couple of times a month. There were times when they would have me for 2 or 3 weeks, and, I'd go every day someplace. Or they would take me out of town someplace. I would go in these little planes and go to different military bases. Sometimes there were houses. I went to Texas a lot. I went to Maryland a lot. And let's see, it was a lot during the year 63 and 64. And then right before I graduated, 66, 67, they used me a lot. And then in 72, when I was getting ready to graduate from college, they got a hold of me a couple of times for several weeks. And it was pretty much, I could expect it every August, because a lot of people would come to New Orleans in August and May for some convention or something. There would always be a lot of doctors in town, and I knew I was going to have to go someplace. But I didn't know in between, because obviously I would forget. They would always make sure that I forgot before they sent me home. They had to do that, because obviously I couldn't go home remembering that I had just been with Senator Long or somebody like that. They had to make sure that I had amnesia. So they gave me amnesia barriers or whatever, in between.
And how would they do that?
Shock treatments.
Electricity? Electricity,
yeah. That causes some amnesia for recent events. So I would have to go back to Tulane and go in this, like a chair that looked like a dentist chair, and they had figured out just how much electricity it took to cause my amnesia and to make it last. And there was a man from Canada that spoke with a funny accent and always called me Lassie. And I always thought, why is he calling me a dog? I thought he was calling me Lassie the dog, the collie. But he was the one who came and figured out how much electricity it would take. And then he was kind of an expert on it or something, I don't know.
Do you remember this person's name?
I called him the cameraman because his last name sounded like cameraman. And he was good friends with one of the dull men, the dullest men. I called them the dull men. There were two of them. And he was good friends with one of them because he was a doctor and he had saved the other man's son or something. I don't know. But there was a story like he was a hero to this dull man because he saved his son from something. And they even named an institute after. He worked for an institute or something that was named after one of the dull men. There was one that I never met but heard about. And then I knew that the one called John, the dull man called John, but I didn't know that his brother. I just heard about him. And I guess it was Dulles.
Yeah, that would have been John Foster Dulles.
There was a lot of people that I never really heard the real name, but after a while, and the people who researched all this and, would say, well, obviously you're talking about, John Dulles. Or I'd say, well, who's that? Because I've never been very big on, I've always stayed away from anything having to do with politics, watching the news. I've always had an aversion to that, and I never knew why until now. And now I know. So I made a point of not knowing anything about politics or politicians, and so these names meant nothing to me until people would tell me who they were.
Did you remember the actual name of the person you're describing as the cameraman?
I was told after I described what he looked like, and that his last name sounded like cameraman, and that he talked with an accent, that he was Ewen Cameron, Dr. Ewen Cameron from Canada.
And what was Dr. Cameron specifically involved in?
Electricity.
Just the electricity?
With me, yeah. They brought him to New Orleans, to Tulane, to give me shock treatments and to figure out exactly how much they needed and how many times they needed to give it to me to make me forget until, the next time. And so he gave me different amounts of shock, different times. And I think I was there for several days, maybe 3 or 4 days, and the first time I met him. And I guess I wasn't even a teenager yet. I was like 10 or 11. And he also did something else. He would make messages on tape, and at night when you slept, you had to listen to these messages. And I guess they used him because of his voice or something, because he had a really interesting voice that made you want to listen.
So it would be his voice?
Things over and over again.
It would be his voice on the tapes that were used?
Mm-hmm. They'd have other people on tape too, but I remember during this time when they were doing the electricity, at night they would give me what they called a sleep cocktail. It would make you very sleepy. Put you in a dark room, put these earphones on you, and then they had something on your, attached to your toes and to maybe one finger, these little, like, clothespin, it felt like. And so you go to sleep listening to this tape that was going on and his messages. And then if you fell asleep, something would wake you up, and it would be the things that were attached to you, to your toes and your hand. And I guess it was little jolts of electricity or something to wake you up. And it would keep you from sleeping at all. You couldn't sleep the whole night. You had to listen constantly.
And how long would this go on for?
3 or 4 days, 3 or 4 nights.
Continuous? You were not allowed to sleep during those 3 or 4 days?
Mm-mm. Nope.
And do you have memories of what the messages were that were being used?
It always started with Crystal. They'd always start with your mother abandoned you. She didn't want you. That I was bad. That I enjoyed doing these perverted things. That type of thing. The doctors were the only ones who could save me. The doctors were my friends. I had to listen to the doctors, and only them. They wouldn't name any names specifically. They would just say the doctors, the good doctors. So that all my life, I always, if anything was wrong, I always went to a doctor. Because this is what was ingrained in me, was that doctors were the answer to everything. And believe me, my whole life, when I wasn't going through all this stuff, I was constantly having, something would be wrong with me. I was in and out of the hospital. I had all sorts of illnesses that they never could diagnose specifically what was wrong with me. I had a history of headaches, migraine headaches my whole life. And the headaches were from the shock treatments. They give you horrible headaches. And you wake up from getting shock treatments, and your head just feels like it's going to explode. So they would get you on painkillers. And then, of course, they get you addicted to painkillers, so you'd have to keep going back to get more painkillers for the headaches. And I had surgeries that I found out later didn't even need to be done, but they were looking for things that were wrong with me. Because I would go to other doctors, and they wouldn't know anything about this. They would just, I had episodes where I was vomiting constantly, couldn't keep any food down, was losing weight, and I had surgery, exploratory surgery, never did find anything wrong with me.
Where was the surgery done on you?
Oh, in my stomach.
Mm-hmm.
Abdominal surgery. They took my gallbladder out, my appendix, but there was nothing wrong with them. And I kept vomiting. And what it is body pain. Body memories come back. Before the actual memory comes back, before the flashbacks come, you get the body pain first. That's the first sign that you're getting a memory. It usually starts with a headache, and then like stomach ache, cramps, the actual pain of the memory without the rest of the memory, without remembering what happened. You would just get the pain part. Pain comes first. Always. Pain is a barrier to remembering. Because you'd be in so much pain, you would want to get rid of the pain right away. So I would call up Dr. Brown, Charles Brown, who was the friend, the one I told you about was my monitor, who was a family friend and friends with Darwin Fenner and Robert Heath, Martin Orne. And I would go to him and say, I'm having these horrible headaches again, or I'm having these cramps and they won't go away. And of course that would be a sign to him she's remembering. She's going to start remembering pretty soon. So then he would take me to Dr. Heath, and he'd say, well, he's going to fix me up. And he'd give me more shock treatments. And then I'd go home and forget.
He would give you electroshock.
Mm-hmm. And then painkillers for the headaches that I would get afterwards, but the body pain would go away because I'd stop remembering. Or I'd start having nightmares about snakes or weird things, and I'd go to Dr. Brown and say, I'm having these nightmares, and he would think, oh, she's going to start remembering soon, so we got to do something. And it's usually shock that they use, but sometimes they can just use trauma. They can just traumatize you so much that you forget.
And how would they traumatize you?
It depended on what was going on at the time. Sometimes they would send me to, they knew people in the city that were involved in the white supremacy groups. And sometimes they would send me out to, when they had their Klan meetings, and I'd have to go to one of them at night and watch things being done to other people, and then have things done to me, be raped or eaten, whatever. You have enough trauma to make you forget whatever you were starting to remember. This would make it go away. And then you'd forget this as soon as it happened, too.
because nobody wants to remember something like that. One of the body's defenses, I guess, or the mind's defense is if something really horrible happens to you, you forget it right away, usually, if it's bad enough. And then, of course, I had the personalities, and they would come out for the trauma, and then they'd go back, and so Claudia would have no memory of what just happened. My shadows would, but I wouldn't. And unless they give me the memory, then it was as if it never happened to me. I'd be sore or hurt, bruised or whatever, but I wouldn't know why. So I'd go to, Dr. Brown or Dr. Heath, and they would explain to me what happened to me. And usually they would make up some story about how I tried to hurt myself. I tried to kill myself again. I thought I was suicidal my whole life because they told me I was.
Did you feel that the doctors were deliberately creating dissociation with you?
Yes, they knew that I could dissociate from the beginning, so they just caused me to dissociate even more, because the more you split, the easier it was to hide what they were doing. In other words, you can only split, they can't make you split. They can't make you dissociate. But they can create the circumstances that they know you will, if you're able to dissociate, you'll do it. Like the trauma I just described, like sending me out to a Masonic lodge for a party. They would send me out, and you knew something horrible was going to happen. I mean, they knew something horrible was going to happen to me. They knew that I would split, that someone would be created just to take whatever happened that night. And probably that's all they would do. And then they would go back and, go to sleep, become dormant. And these are the shadows that I was talking about that have integrated. Once they gave me the memory of, say, that experience, then they integrate. But so they create circumstances to make you split and split and split. And the more you split, of course, the less chance you have of ever healing. The more crazy you're going to sound if you ever do go to a psychiatrist or a therapist, because there was always that chance that I might get away from them and seek help from someone other than the good doctors that I knew already. There was always that chance, so they had to make you seem as crazy as possible. And of course, the more alters you have, the more bizarre you're going to seem to people. And the more bizarre the trauma, like sending you to, like to the camp that I went to across the lake that Mr. Fenner had. They would put on these ceremonies, and a lot of times it was fake stuff. They would pretend to cut people open or kill babies. Back then, I thought it was real. I thought it was really happening. Well, if you go describe something like that about a ceremony where a baby is cut up and killed and eaten, people are going to think, you're insane. This didn't happen. So they would kind of mimic satanic rituals to make it seem like that had happened, and then if I ever told anybody, they would dismiss it right away.
So you feel that these things were done basically to cover the doctor's tracks?
Oh, right. To make me seem, if I ever remembered, I would remember first the incest stuff, the stuff at home, and then it would gradually go from that to the ritual stuff. Rituals meaning either the satanic stuff across the lake, rituals like the white supremacy groups, the rituals that they do, burning the crosses. I actually saw them kill people, black people. And this is like in the early 60s. Masonic. I went to a couple of Masonic parties. at a lodge that was located right near the research building. It was a research building for animal experiments in New Orleans, and it's still there, as a matter of fact. I've been back there, and they sent me there sometimes for certain tests or for experiments. And there was a Masonic lodge right around the corner from it, and they sent me to a couple of parties there. And these people they go crazy at these parties. These men, they just get drunk and, they just pass you around, and it's horrible what they do. And this, of course, makes it seem like if I ever remember, well, I remember being at this party and these men hurting me, but I don't remember doctors being involved. I don't remember Tulane University being involved, or anybody from Maryland. I remember, I would remember this Masonic lodge. And so that's how they cover their tracks.
Was it sexual abuse that was going on, or other kinds of abuse at these parties?
Yes. They'd make you perform sexually. They'd make you watch other people perform. I mean, they would have everything you can imagine, even bringing in animals. And you had to watch, it's just as bad as having it done to yourself. Sometimes watching is just as worse. I mean, just as bad.
Watching it being done to other people. Children? Or
yeah, especially if it's people younger than yourself. You're a child, and you have to stand there and watch a little kid who's half your age being tortured or raped or whatever. I mean, that's just as bad as having it done to yourself. You'd almost rather it be done to you because, I don't know, because of you know what it's like, and you don't want to watch it. And then they would give you the choice, well, you can take her place. And then you'd have to make the decision whether it's going to be you or her. And if you decided not to do it, well, then you have to live with the guilt that it happened to someone else because you decided not to do it. So they had you either way you looked at it. I mean, you're screwed either way, literally. I mean, there was no way out of any of these situations.
And when you remembered this lodge, did you make attempts to verify if it was where it was? And
yeah, we went there.
Mm-hmm.
We went to the lodge and talked to people. It's not a lodge anymore. It's a public health building, actually, now. But, yeah, we talked to people that had been there, and they said, yeah, it was a Masonic lodge at one time. So Valerie and I went there. We went to Camp Nichols, which I said is a police training ground now, but they said it was an arsenal at one time. And we went in the room where I stayed when I was there, and they did some kind of bizarre thing with me there. I guess I was about 8. And I was taken there, and there was 2 other children that I was put with, a boy and a little girl, about 5 years old. And they would do things like, I guess just to traumatize you. They would do things sexual to you or physically, hurt you, beat you, whatever. And then they would say, well, we're going to choose one person, or you have to choose somebody, which person's going to live or die, the boy or the girl. They would give you choices like that, and I mean, impossible situations. And then, they go through the motions as if they would take one of the kids outside and kill him. And you thought that they would, and they didn't. I'm sure they didn't. I'm sure it was just like a play they put on. But it was just to put you through this, these mind games, just, I don't know, just to mess up your, I don't know what they were doing, but it was trauma, I know that. And by the time you finished, you didn't know whether you were coming or going. it just seems so bizarre. And, if I had ever remembered it before now, before I had a good therapist to help me and who validated the fact that these things do happen, anybody else would think you're crazy. And they'd lock you up and throw away the key.
And I think that was their intent on, it seems that
and there was a lot of messages that they gave you over the years that if you did start remembering all this, the guilt would be so bad that you'd have to kill yourself. And they were hoping that by now I had killed myself. And I haven't. They're pretty pissed off about it, the people that are left.
Did you feel that they were using this trauma to create dissociation for other purposes than just kind of hiding the fact that they were doing the experiments on you?
Well, I think they were doing it also just to see what they could do. They could take a child's mind and what could they actually do? How much could they cause her to split? How many times? Or how much could they do to somebody and how quickly they could forget it? Just to see what could be done, I think. Just for the hell of it, I guess.
Or perhaps that was part of the experimentation itself?
Yeah, they had a lot of different projects. It wasn't all sexual stuff. There were a lot of projects that were just about mind control, that were they had these names for these projects that were, you'd never know what the project was really about, because sensitive research, that was a part of the operational side of the CIA, and there was a department called sensitive research. Well, it was sexual stuff, but sensitive research, that could be just about anything, right? And Uncle Richard was head of the sensitive research department, or the dirty tricks department, he called it. Uncle Richard turned out to be, after I described him and had a lot of memories of him, I found out from one of the experts that his name was Helms, Richard Helms.
And he was the CIA director at
yeah, when I knew him, he was the deputy. Mm-hmm. They called him the deputy. I remember being impressed because I loved cowboys and cowboy movies and stuff. And so when he told me he was a deputy, that's all I heard was the word deputy. And I thought a deputy like in the Old West. And I was real impressed with him. And he didn't really molest me or do anything to me until I got to be about 13. And then he started, all of a sudden, it was call me Uncle Richard. Before that he pretty much would dismiss me or just talk around me or not pay any attention to me. And I always was really impressed by this person because he seemed to have a lot of power and everybody seemed to listen to what he said. He dressed like in the most expensive clothes. He always looked really nice. He had everybody waiting on him hand and foot. And so he was just like an impressive man. And I always was in kind of awe of him. And then all of a sudden, when I'm about ready to turn 13, he starts paying attention to me. And that really impressed me. I thought, I must really be special. This guy says, call me Uncle Richard now. And it turns out, I guess he liked teenage girls. He didn't like children. And he would purposely take me to places that he knew they didn't have cameras. Because, of course, he knew all about the camera stuff and the filming. Because he was partly one of the people who thought of it. Mm-hmm. And then Gottlieb.
I wonder if we could go through the people that you have mentioned in your testimony, and if we could talk one by one about what exactly they were involved in the experimentation.
Okay.
Maybe we could start with Sidney Gottlieb.
Okay. Sidney Gottlieb, he's one of the first people that I remember from when I was 8 years old. He was there from the beginning. I knew that he told me he worked for the agency. They always referred to themselves as the agency. When they meant the CIA, they called themselves the agency. They made no I mean, they made no secret of the fact that it was the CIA, but, and sometimes they would, I would overhear, or they would tell me what department they were from. And he was in the science and technology department, he said. He worked very closely with Martin Orne, a Dr. Stephen Aldrich, and the Morse Allen man, the Morse man, I called him. And apparently he and the Morse Allen had been working together since this whole thing started in the late 40s, early 50s. And they were very good friends, and Gottlieb was very good friends with Richard Helms, too, which was kind of odd because they were like complete opposites of each other. And they seemed like totally like people who could never get along with each other, yet they were really good friends. Anyhow, he had a lot to do with radiation. He had a lot to do with any kind of research. And like I said, I remember him a lot from when I was little and all the way till, I guess, through the time I was in high school. And then after that, I didn't see him much. I didn't hear about him very much. I don't know where he went or what he was doing. He must have been involved in something else.
So about how many years was he involved in what happened to you?
From the time I was about 8 till 16, about 8 years. And he told me that he raised goats. And, I mean, they would talk about themselves sometimes. It was amazing. These people would just, as if, I guess they figured I wasn't going to remember anything when I left, wherever I was. So they were just free to talk, and sometimes they just liked to brag about themselves. And so that's how I would remember so much about them, because they were arrogant. Most of them were very arrogant people, and they liked you to know how important they were, or how many kids they had, or how much power they had. So they would say what their title was or something to impress you, I guess. Thinking the whole time that she's not going to remember anything, or thinking they're talking to a child who doesn't even understand the words they're using, not knowing that years later I'm going to remember the same words and understand their meaning. See, they're thinking that they're telling this to an 8-year-old who doesn't have a clue what the words mean, but never thinking that I was going to remember later on. So.
Now, you mentioned Dr. Ewen Cameron
Yeah.
Was specifically involved in the electroshock. Do you have a sense of how long of a period he was involved with your experimentation?
Well, they called him, a lot of them they called them consultants. They would consult them on, Dr. Heath or Dr. Green would say, let's call Ewen Cameron in to test her. And then the next thing I knew, I would be called back to Tulane, and here was this man, the cameraman, and he came in, I guess, when I was about around 1960, when I was about 10, 9 or 10, I guess, and he was there a lot at first, testing, how much electricity it took to make me forget how much was too much, or how much, they didn't want to fry my brain or anything because they needed me to seem fairly intelligent, I guess, so I could, associate with people. I had to go back to school, and so they had to be very careful when they used stuff on me, and they couldn't disfigure me. I guess I was lucky in that sense that I was in school. I was in a private girls' school. I was from a wealthy family, and they had to send me back home. And my family wasn't really involved in it per se. My mother knew they were using me, but she didn't know for what. So they had to send me back in fairly good condition. And so that made me one of the lucky ones, because there were others that were from homeless families or, poor families where they didn't care what condition they sent the kid back, or if they even sent the child back at all. and they used things on them that would disfigure them, and it didn't matter. But I guess in my case, like I said, I was fortunate. And another thing, Dr. Heath wanted to implant something in my brain, and Mr. Fenner wouldn't let him because he said, how am I going to explain this to her mother? I can't send her home with her head shaved. So I got out of having implants in my brain because of that. So anyhow, you asked me about Cameron, though. I knew him from about, I guess, 1959 or 60. And then when I was in high school, I was told one day, just out of the blue, someone said, oh, he fell off a mountain. He's not coming. Somebody named Cleghorn is coming to take his place to do the electric shocks. And I was told years later, that, yeah, as a matter of fact, he was mountain climbing or something, or skiing, and he fell off a mountain and died. So that was true, what they told me. But,
and did you have a sense of who this Cleghorn person was?
He worked with the Cameron very closely. I guess he was from the same place. He liked to use electricity, only he thought that Cameron didn't use enough. He believed in using a lot more. And he was not very... He didn't try to get along with you or act friendly in any way. He was very cold. And whereas Cameron, at least, would talk to you and, attempt to be friendly. Some of them were like that. Some of them would, introduce themselves or ask you questions. And others just did what they had to do and got out of there and never said a word. But
so about how many years did you come in contact with Dr. Cameron? From about 59 to 60 until when?
So I think it was when I was about 16,
so
16 and a half, so that would be 1966.
So about 7 years?
When I was told that he had fallen off a mountain. I know I was in high school. I know I was in the latter part of high school, so it had to be around 66 or 67. And the thing I was telling you about the messages that he would give me, that he would record and then they would play at night, he called it something called psychic driving.
Right.
So that's what the messages were called. But I don't remember him after like 66 or 67. I think that was the last I saw of him.
And Martin Orne, what was his involvement?
Gosh, horrible. He was one of the scariest people. Okay, he worked with Dr. Brown, who was my monitor, at the NIH in the 50s, and they were good friends. And he said he was an expert in lie detection, and that he could always tell if someone was lying, that he had invented the lie detector or something. I don't know. I'm sure he was really, he is a very arrogant person, and he thinks a lot of himself. And so I'm sure he told me a lot of lies about what he could do and what he couldn't do, Well, there wasn't anything he couldn't do, supposedly. He could tell whenever you were lying. He hated everyone. He didn't get along with hardly anyone. He called me the little bitch. That was his nickname for me. He wouldn't even call me by name. And he mainly did hypnosis type stuff. He was always there for the shock treatments. There's nothing else just to watch. He would hook me up to, when they asked me questions, he would be the one to tell them whether I was lying or not. And he'd have me hooked up to a couple of machines and have electrodes on my head. And he said he could read the machines and tell them whether I was lying or not. I guess it was like a lie detector, I don't know. And he's still alive, in Philadelphia. Well, I spoke to him. I called him. He was one of the people I called because I remembered him. Before I started getting all his memories back, I remembered Dr. Heath. Of course, Dr. Brown. but I remembered this Martin Orne.
So at what point did you phone him back?
I phoned him
Contact him?
after the rape happened in October '92. In that next spring, when I started getting all these weird nightmares and flashbacks, I remembered Martin Orne.
So you remembered him as one of your so-called good doctors.
Doctors, right. So I called him, and I had his home number. I called him, and he said, had I called Dr. Heath? I said, yeah, but he wants me to come back for more electroshock treatments. And he said, well, that's what you need to do then. And I said, well, why did you do those things to me? I mean, I remember you. You were so mean. And he said he never did anything to hurt me. And he was just there as a consultant, and he just talked to me. And he swore up and down he never did anything to hurt me. Then I heard, after we got back from Washington testifying, I heard that he had a stroke. And that he's still, paralyzed from the stroke, I think. So,
And what about Dr. Robert Heath? What specifically was he involved? What aspects of the...
He's a neuropsychiatrist. He was the head of the department at Tulane. It was his department that was given the money, the grant money. He was also given a whole, Mr. Fenner, who was chairman of the board of Tulane Medical School, gave him a whole wing of the medical school just to use for experiments. And there were just a lot of children, I remember. We weren't allowed to talk to each other, or even we weren't even supposed to see each other, but you could hear them sometimes, and you'd stay on this wing where there weren't any nurses, really. It was just like orderlies and the doctors. But it wasn't like a regular hospital, like with nurses that came in to see you. You had monitors in your room. They watched you. I'm pretty sure they had a camera in the room. And Dr. Heath was the head of the department there, and he also was known for doing a lot of work on brains, on experimenting on people's brains. And he was the one who wanted to put an implant in my brain so that he could telegraph, he said, messages to me when I was doing the entrapment things with men, that he could stimulate different parts of your brain or something, and he could do it by remote, he didn't call it remote, he said he could access my brain from a distance, but he had to implant a box in your head.
So would you say he was the main doctor in charge of what happened to you, or?
Yes, he was considered my doctor, like on record. I had to have a record, a chart at Tulane, under the name Crystal Stone. And he was Crystal Stone's doctor of record. If you looked under, of course, he's now removed my records. When I called him the first time and said, what did you do to me? I mean, I'm having these memories, and I thought you were my doctor back then. I thought my mother had brought me to Tulane because Mr. Fenner told her, well, I think they can help her at Tulane because I was having behavioral problems at home when I was real little. This was before Deep Creek Lodge and all that, before I was 8 years old. She said I was acting out and I was crying a lot and wetting the bed and stuff like that. And so Mr. Fenner suggested that she bring me to Tulane to see this Dr. Heath. And that's how I met him, was with my mother. And she signed papers giving him permission to do anything that he saw necessary to help me. So he had free reign to do anything he wanted to me with my mother's permission. And of course, he never, he would call and tell her, well, Claudia needs to come in for a treatment. Bring her in, or, have somebody bring her in. And she just dropped me off in the front of the building. I'm just 6 or 7 years old. She dropped me off at this big, huge hospital, and I'd have to go in and take the elevator up, and the woman would come get me and take me to the room. And I would be there for days, sometimes weeks. And then the next thing I knew, I'd wake up one morning, and Dr. Heath would be standing there, and he'd say, well, how are you feeling, dear? fine. Well, you ready to go home? You're cured. You know, and he would tell me that I was much better and that I wasn't going to misbehave anymore, and I wouldn't have any clue as to what happened to me while I was there. I would just wake up with no memory of it, and he would tell me that I'd been good and obedient and it was time to go home. So he'd send me home, and then he'd call my mother if I had, like, bruises or anything that had to be explained, and he would give her some explanation as to how they happened. Or if I was bleeding, he would tell her that they had to do an examination or something, a test, and that it made me bleed. I mean, she didn't really question anything. I don't think she really cared. She didn't want to know.
And what about Morse Allen, you mentioned? From what you remembered, what was his involvement?
He was from, he was with the department that was called Science and Technology. And I think Orne at one time was the head of that. Martin Orne was the head of the Science and Technology department. And he was with ORD, something called ORD, Office of Research and Development. And Morse Allen was like the head of that. And it was research on a whole bunch of different things. But I know he had a lot to do with radiation, because I heard him talk about it. But he also worked with projects involved with me. I remember him pretty much from the beginning, from 1958 to sometime in high school, and then I don't remember him anymore.
And what about L. Wilson Green, you also mentioned?
Yeah. Now, he, next to Heath, I guess he had the most authority, or whatever you want to call it. He was a German doctor. Liam was his first name, but he hated being called anything but Dr. Green. And he was head of Edgewood Arsenal, or that's where his office was, Edgewood Arsenal in Fort Detrick, Maryland. But he came to Tulane quite a bit and worked with Dr. Heath on the projects. And he told me, or he told, when I was about 14 or 15, he told me the story. He told one of my shadows a story that how he got involved. And he said that he was in a concentration camp because he was Jewish. And he had been in the concentration camp when the war ended. And the Nazis had killed his sister, put him in the concentration camp, and he had met the Angel of Death there, and that was his hero. And he used to love to watch him do experiments on twins and everything. And I didn't know who the Angel of Death was. I didn't even know who that was, but it turned out it was Mengele. And Dr. Green said that when he was 15, no, he was put in the camp when he was 15. I don't know how long he stayed, but when the war ended, the United States paid to bring him back. Our government paid to bring him back to the United States and put him through medical school, and now they paid him to do these experiments. And he said, so your government pays for me to do things to you. And he was real, he thought our government was full, they were made up of fools, that everybody was a fool, that they were stupid. But he said he got paid by him, so, and they're the ones who got him out of the camp.
So what you're saying is it seems that L. Wilson Green, although a victim at the concentration camps under Mengele, had somehow associated himself.
He'd gotten in good with Mengele, but
helped with the experiments.
An interest in the experiments they were doing, and so he sort of became like, he wasn't really a prisoner anymore. I guess he was more like he worked like his assistant almost, even though he was Jewish. I guess he showed a lot of, morbid interest in what they were doing. And anyhow, this was his story. I don't know that it's even true.
Right.
He told me this. I don't think he's ever told anybody else. I mean, I think he told everybody different things. This is the story he told me. He didn't really talk about himself. He didn't seem to have any private life. He never talked about a wife or children. He seemed to always be traveling from one place to another. I never even knew where he stayed when he was in New Orleans until years later I found out he stayed at the Camp Nichols. I thought he lived at the hospital because he was always there.
Were any of the doctors involved in sexually abusing you while this experimentation was going on?
Yes. A lot of them were. Most of them took advantage of the fact that, as long as they were there, they had access, they would, do whatever they wanted. One of the few that didn't was Gottlieb, and I was told because it was kind of a joke that was going around that he only liked little boys. And so I guess that's why he didn't want anything to do with me. Martin Orne did, though. Dr. Green did a couple of times. Dr. Brown. And of course, a lot of the agency men, they did. Hamilton, he was a horrible man. James Hamilton, he was from California. I think, no, he was from, Stanford, I think. Place Stanford, or I don't know. He was from California, and he was involved in projects that had to do with deviant sexual behavior. And he every time he got a chance, he would, from the time I was 8 years old until, in my 20s, he took advantage of it. They even had a tape of him. He didn't seem to really care, though.
What kind of other people were you forced to have sex with in terms of blackmailing, and what were their backgrounds?
Military people. They had these people called the Inspector Generals that came around, and they would go around the country looking at different places that they were doing these projects, and they would determine whether the money was being well spent or not. So one of the ways, I guess, they would convince them that the money was being used well was by offering them, whoever they wanted. And so I remember they usually wore uniforms. They were usually in the military. And they were inspectors. And I would say, the inspector's coming, you better be nice to him, you better do whatever he wants. And they always took advantage of you. One was the man with the wings on his jacket, I remember. He was a colonel, and he wore a uniform. I guess he was in the Air Force. I guess that's why he had wings on his jacket. And he was one of the inspectors that came. And then there was an admiral that came, and he was an inspector. So that was mainly the military men. They were either present at. They used to have these things that, like when I went to Texas a few times, went to this place called TRIMS, TRIMS, and I remember it had the words on the outside of the gate, and I remember R was for research, and T was for Texas, and I was brought there, and they would put on these, not shows, but I guess they had to show a lot of people, like military, agency people, and other doctors. They had to have to show what progress they were making in the projects. And so they would present different subjects that were being used and show what they were able to accomplish. And you'd have to get in front of this audience of people. It was like an auditorium. And they did things like they could create one of the things they could do was, like, when you split, sometimes you can actually cause anesthesia in your body by splitting off that part, and you don't feel the pain at the time that it's happening, but you feel it later. Mm. And they would do things that would cause a lot of pain, but obviously weren't causing pain at the time. And everybody would ooh and ah over that because it was like something really that they had never seen before. And this was how they were proving they were using the money they were being given. I mean, they had to show people that they were, that they weren't just spending it on, hotel rooms and food and stuff. I guess they had to show that they were actually doing research. And I remember that distinctly in Texas, having that thing done, where they would inflict pain and you wouldn't feel it. You could, they'd put you in a trance, like under hypnosis, tell you that you couldn't feel this part of your body, and then they would put a lit candle on it. And you wouldn't feel anything. But later on, you'd feel the burn. It was like a demonstration. And I think it was an Air Force base that I was at. And I guess people would fly into... And I wasn't the only one. It was like a whole line of people waiting to go in, and we all had gowns on, like hospital gowns. And Dr. Heath and Dr. Green brought me in, and they would talk to the audience and say what they were going to do. And then,
now, I wonder if we can talk about the specific programs that that you believe that you were involved in, that you might have overheard. I know you mentioned MK Ultra. What in terms of your experience, what was MK Ultra about, and maybe we could go through some of the other objects.
Well, it was my understanding that this is how it was kind of explained to me. Not really explained, but as I overheard them talking about it. Back during the Second World War, when they started all this research stuff, and they had a project called Bluebird, and but they had to change the name because there was another branch of the government that was doing something called Bluebird, so they changed it to Artichoke, the Big A, they would call it. And they were trying to create amnesia, and I think they were going to use it on soldiers, but they had to test it on people first. And there was a professor that was doing it, and I never met him or anything. I just heard them talk about him. Anyhow, this eventually became MK Ultra, and MK Ultra was like the generic name for all the projects went under MK Ultra. A lot of them did. Most of them did. And MK was supposed to stand for mind control. I know the spelling isn't right, but
it would be the correct spelling in using the German word control.
Okay, well maybe Dr. Green thought of that. Mm-hmm. And Ultra was because it was ultimate in mind control. And so they would call a project like, let's say, one time I went to Mexico City briefly to get filmed with a person there, and it was 128, they called it. MK Ultra 128. And then it would be Subproject 18. And I was subject number 3. I mean, because after an experiment was over, Dr. Heath or whoever was in charge of it, and most of the time it was Dr. Heath because he was like in charge of me, would have to sit down and dictate, like doctors do. They dictate to a machine their notes about a case, after surgery or something, how doctors do that. Well, they had to do the same thing because it had to go on record into the CIA files. And then every now and then I would sit there and listen. I was supposed to be either sleeping or resting or something, and of course not paying attention, but I would be listening. And that part of me that had the photographic memory would be memorizing what they were saying. And he would go into this long, detailed explanation of the project that they had just done. And then every now and then he would say the word delete. Like he would say, MK Ultra, July 63 in Mexico City, delete. And that meant delete the last thing that he said, because sometimes they didn't want to give too much detail. And then there were other projects that I weren't involved in, but I overheard them talking about, like MK Naomi, and that had to do with drugs that they used to do different things to soldiers, like they were going to use it on the enemy. And it caused the K problem, they called it, which was paralysis. I would hear, like, Operation Secret was under MK Ultra, and that was a project. And it had to do with the brain.
Were there any other project names that you recall?
MK Search.
And what did that involve?
Sometimes some of that had to do, sounded like, with biologicals or bacteria, like, I guess it was germ warfare, and some to do with radiation. MK Ultra, like, sub-project number 3 was to do with safe houses that they used, which were places like the Roosevelt Hotel here in New Orleans. It was a place that they kept all year round, and they had cameras, and it was someplace safe to, I guess, that they could use and not worry about anybody finding out about it. Anything to do with hypnosis or radiation or electricity came under the Office of Research and Development. And Martin Orne was technical science director, I think, of that department for a long time. Operation Chatter had to do with giving drugs and making you talk. Like, I guess, trying different drugs out that would make they could get soldiers to, capture enemy soldiers and make them talk. They called it Chatter.
What would you like to see done to help yourself and other survivors that have gone through this?
I'd like to see us validated by opening up whatever CIA files remain classified. And I feel like a lot of the information I've given will be there. I know that my name exists in the files because I actually saw it on a file that was in 1964. I had access to a file that was left out in a room, and my name was on there. I mean, Crystal Stone, not Claudia, but Crystal Stone was on there. And it was something that was to be, it was a memo that was going to be sent to the director. And so I have a feeling that even though they destroyed a lot of the files, that there'll be some left, and possibly with my name or other facts that people have given, and it'll be validation. And even though these people can't be prosecuted for it, I want the president to acknowledge the fact that it happened and that something should be done about it.
And what do you see, how do you see this coming about? The one element is declassifying the files that are still left.
Right. I think they should have another commission, this time on mind control, specifically on mind control. They've just had a committee, an investigation of the Tuskegee, those experiments.
Right.
And there's supposed to be another commission that President Clinton is opening on other CIA stuff. So I think I'd like to see him have a committee specifically for mind control and looking in the CIA files for mind control, especially done on children. Because that's the most horrible part of all this, is that they did this to children. wasn't just unwitting citizens that got hurt. I mean, they did this to little kids. They did these horrible things to children, and they didn't think anything of it.
And
they didn't feel any guilt or remorse about it. I know that.
From what you remember, what's your sense of how many other children were involved?
I'm sure there was thousands and thousands. I mean, just from the amount of children I saw that summer at Deep Creek Lodge in Maryland, I mean, there must have been 75 kids there. And you can imagine if that's just one time that I went, how many other kids were involved. And every time they went, if they saw 75 kids, and multiply that times all over the country, I mean, we must be talking about thousands and thousands. And all these kids are grown up now. And I think we should be acknowledged that it happened to us and that it shouldn't have happened, and make sure that it's not happening anymore. How do we know that they're still not doing things like this?
Have you been in contact with other survivors throughout?
Yes, in contact all the time through the internet. I meet them at conferences.
And when did you start getting in contact with other survivors?
Right after Washington.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, I didn't really have. I was just mainly involved in my own therapy, and that was the first contact I had with any other survivors was in Washington, D.C., and since then it's been constant contact with people. Because there were similarities, like they would have some similar things that happened to them that I had talked about, or just the fact that there's a lot of us that were adopted that were used in these experiments. And I'm sure there's a reason for that. I mean, I think there's an inordinate amount of children that were adopted that were used.
What would you want or expect as an outcome if hearings were held on mind control experiments?
I want the president to acknowledge, to come out and tell the world that this did happen, that the government was behind it, that they paid for it, that our tax dollars paid for it. I don't expect much in compensation as far as money. I mean, that's not why I'm doing it. I don't know if there'll be any money, but that's not the point. The point is that people need to know that what our government is capable of doing, what they did, and they should own up to it. Even though most of the people, you can say, well, most of them are dead, so what's the point of going into all this? But we need to acknowledge that this kind of thing can happen, has happened, document it, so that it never happens again, and so that people aren't living in a dream world where your government doesn't do things like this. Not in this country. Mm-hmm. Things like this don't happen, but they do, and they did. And people need to know that.
What can people that are listening that may want to help further progress on getting hearings started?
Right to the White House, to the President, to Mrs. Clinton. If they have a computer, you can email them directly. They have an email address. If everybody were to write and demand that there be hearings on mind control experiments done on children, I think they would have to listen if enough people, especially victims, children that are grown up now that were victims, if they come forward and say that I want this looked into. The files have to be opened. They have to be allowed for everyone to see what's in them. There's no reason to keep them classified anymore. I think they need to contact their senators, congressmen, and keep after the president until something's done.
Claudia, I'd like to thank you very much for joining and being part of this radio series. I know I consider it extremely brave of you to come forward with your experiences that you've remembered and of these horrific experiments that are inexcusable. And I think people do have to make the government accountable for what they have done.
Yes, thank you, and I definitely agree. And I'd be glad to talk to anybody that, that wants to contact me through the internet.
Did you want to give out an email address?
My email address is CMULLEN, CMullen 267, CMullen267 at AOL.com.
Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you, Wayne.
We've been listening to an interview with Claudia Mullen, a survivor of U.S. government mind control. And the Advocacy Committee for Human Experimentation Survivors of Mind Control has produced a video letter of statements from mind control survivors demanding an investigation into mind control, which has been sent to President Clinton and Prime Minister Chrétien. You can send faxes, email, and letters of support for a commission of inquiry into the mind control experiments on children to Prime Minister Chrétien and President Clinton. Next week, the International Connection will be preempted to bring you Here and Queer, CKLN's Pride Week.